Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this video, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for the week starting on Monday, June 16th, 2025. And I'm going to be starting the video with an account of the main astrological events taking place this week. And it's going to be a preview, and I'm just going to briefly go over these events. And of course, over the next week I'll be going into these events in greater detail. And at the end of the video I'm going to do an I Ching reading for the week, and this reading will have 4 sections: a general section, then money, and then career, and then relationships. But most importantly, I want to look at the horoscope of Donald Trump, the President of the United States. Now, why would I want to do that? Because it's his birthday. I'm making this recording early on Saturday, June the 14th. And that's the day when Donald Trump turns 79. So, that is a great opportunity to look at what is going on in his chart, looking at his transits, his directions, his solar returns, and maybe I'll also look at his Vedic chart. It's going to be great. But first of all, I want to look at the main events this week. By the way, don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So here is the chart for the very beginning of a week, midnight on June the 16th, New York time. And so here is the chart. And so week starts off with Mars conjunct Regulus. Mars very, very late in Leo, and that is a reminder that Mars is on the absolute verge of moving into Virgo. Also, at the beginning of a week, we have a semi-square between Mercury and Uranus. There's Mercury at 13 Cancer, and it's 45 degrees away from Uranus. Now, I regard that as being an important aspect. So, over the course of a weekend of, the 14th and the 15th, there was a square between Mars and Uranus. And I regard this square as being very important, and we've already started to see some of its impacts. We had that terrible plane crash in India, and additionally we had this massive attack on Iran by Israel. And I'm making this recording on Saturday, but who knows what is going to happen over the weekend. Well, I'm supposed to know because I'm an astrologer, but one can guess, and it does look like being potentially quite a difficult weekend. But this Mercury square Uranus, semi-square Uranus, it triggers the Mars Uranus square. And so, although in itself Mercury square Uranus might seem not a particularly important aspect, because Mars and Uranus are in square aspect, I think that it could be quite major. And then as you move into Tuesday, Mars moves into Virgo, and that is a big sign change. And I will be talking about it in detail in a couple of days' time. And so Mars moving from Leo to Virgo, Mars in Leo is quite an egotistical sign for Mars, and Mars has been in Leo for a long time, on and off since the presidential election in November of last year. But now finally it changes sign, moves into Virgo, and in Virgo, I believe it starts making a conjunction to the sun of Ukraine, because Ukraine sort of got its independence, declared its independence, and at the end of August, so that it's a Virgo country, right at the beginning of Virgo, with its sun in Virgo. So Mars is going to be rolling over Ukraine's sun, and I think one of the NATO charts, because you can do charts for NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, one of those charts has also got the sun in Aquarius. Sorry, the sun in the sun in at 0 degrees Virgo. So those are two reasons why Mars moving into Virgo might be important. But I will be looking in detail at what that means for Mars moving into Virgo. When I do my horoscope readings for Tuesday. Then next day, Wednesday, we've got Sun by quintile Pluto. I don't think that is an especially important aspect, but it is an aspect which we can use. It can be about boosting our own power, using our will, deciding we want to be something, and being able to, make quite a powerful impression. And then on Thursday the 19th, we have a square between Jupiter and Neptune. So we've got Jupiter here, Jupiter in beginning of Cancer, square Neptune at the beginning of Aries. And this Jupiter-Neptune square could be problematic. Jupiter likes to think the best of things. It's quite an expansive planet, and when you put it next to Neptune, it might have fantasies. It might have delusions. We might really think that things are possible. We might really believe that things are possible, but things will just happen all by themselves. So there is a downside to the Jupiter-Neptune square, but there's also a spiritual dimension to it, and maybe with Jupiter square Neptune, it is a time to tune into our spirituality and consider, what might be possible, and to have faith. Jupiter square Neptune is about faith and, what we believe in. And we might want to take action on the basis of our faith. We believe something is possible. And faith can be a powerful force, but faith can also be the prelude to disappointment. So we do have to be somewhat careful with that Jupiter square Neptune. Then on Friday, we've got Mars quincunx Saturn. So Mars in Virgo makes an 150-degree aspect to Saturn. Now that Mars quincunx Saturn could be quite frustrating. Mars is what we want to do, Mars in Virgo, trying to sort things out, but then Saturn is holding it back, and somehow we've got to integrate Saturn. We can't just reject it and say, try and persuade ourselves that Saturn doesn't exist. It does exist, and we do have to take into account of it. Then on Saturday, we have got the summer solstice. At least it's a summer solstice from the viewpoint of the northern hemisphere. When the sun moves into Cancer in the northern hemisphere, June the 21st is the longest day. Of course, if you're in the southern hemisphere, it's the shortest day, and that is a big event. The sun moving into Cancer, and things do change in the northern hemisphere. It's a peak. After that, the hours of light go down in the northern hemisphere, and they keep reducing until the winter solstice in 6 months' time. And I will be talking in detail about the summer solstice. And then right at the end of a week, we've got two rather contradictory aspects. We've got Mars sextile Jupiter, a very enthusiastic, powerful aspect. Lots of things can happen. We're going to really want to assert ourselves, but we've also got the Sun square Saturn. So as the Sun moves into Cancer, it makes a square to Saturn. And that is something we have to bear in mind. And we might find that we're blocked, or at least we can't do things quite as easily as we thought we could. But, I wouldn't worry about it too much. It could affect us all, and I will be talking in detail about, what that Sun-Saturn square means. So now I want to look at Donald Trump. It is his birthday, and so I want to just consider, what is going on in his life. We know that things are difficult for him. I mean, because he's president of the United States. A lot of challenges, both at home and abroad. We know that we've got these riots in Los Angeles regarding sort of his immigration policy, and he's trying his best to execute his immigration policy, but a lot of people are unhappy about it. And then from the viewpoint of foreign affairs, we've got all sorts of stuff going on in the Middle East, getting really complicated, and one wonders what exactly is going on. Did the Israelis initiate it? Okay, he would have had to have presumably signed off on this Israeli attack on Iran. But what were the pressures on him? And he's got to consider where is it all leading? And of course, there's Ukraine. That is not going to go away. So here is Trump's chart, and so looking at the kind of aspects that he's experiencing at the moment, a lot of it has to do with Mars square Uranus. So at the time of his birthday, June the 14th, June the 14th. Well, he was born June the 14th, 1946, but over the weekend of the 14th and the 15th, Mars is square Uranus. This exact square between Mars and Uranus is on June the 15th, 2025, which is a Sunday. And so looking at how that square affects Trump, he has got his Mars at 26 degrees Leo. And so he has just had Mars transiting his own Mars. In other words, he's just had his Mars return. And additionally, he's got Mars moving on to his ascendant. So 14th, 15th, 16th, around that time, he's going to have Mars rising, and also a Mars return. Now, we already know that things are tough, a lot to deal with, as I've just said, whether it's Iran and Israel, or whether it's Ukraine, or at home he's got riots in Los Angeles. There must be lingering tariff issues. So it is, I would have said, quite a difficult time for him. There's a lot on his plate, and Mars is doing a lot of stuff, and that is really something he is going to have to deal with. And the question is, can he deal with it? And when we think about the other players, Benjamin Netanyahu has his Mars at 26 Leo, so that's a strong connection between the two men. And Mars is bringing it all together, and so it's important that he is somehow able to deal with a challenge. But the question is, can he deal with a challenge? And indeed, does he really know what he's actually doing, what he's actually creating? And I look at Chiron, by the way. Chiron, over the weekend is at 26 Aries, so he's got Chiron trine his Mars. And so Chiron trine his Mars, Chiron is, in this case, could be stirring things up and trying to be different. But at the same time, there is a wound connected with Chiron, and he may feel at times that he may not be fully appreciated. He does what he has to do. He thinks he's acting in America's best interests. Of course, cynics would say that he's only acting his own best interests. But he's a politician. You can't expect politicians to only act in terms of the common good. That comes with a territory, doesn't it? So we really shouldn't have high expectations of anyone in political office, regardless of their political party. And so those are some of the transits going on. And of course, because it's his birthday, we've got a solar return. And I'm going to look at two solar returns. There is the solar return, the direct solar return, and the inverse solar return, the converse solar return. I'll be talking about the dynamics of a converse solar return in a moment, but here is his regular solar return. Here it is. So his solar return was actually on June the 13th. I make it to sort of 12:57. So looking at Trump's solar return, the sun is conjunct the midheaven. And by the way, the solar return is set for his place of birth rather than his residence. That's the way I like to do my solar returns in general. And so sun on the midheaven, you could say that it's a solar return which is about him ploughing forward, having a clear idea about what he wants to do, what he wants to achieve. But this south node, the sun is square the nodal axis, so he has got the nodes right across the ascendant here in this solar return. And so the question is he doing the right thing? What is the right thing for Trump to do? You've got south node on the ascendant here, and you would think with the south node on the ascendant in a solar return, this might be a time when he shouldn't be thinking too much about himself. This is not about him. It's about America, and it's about the common good. And he could be just too impulsive, wanting to plough forward without really thinking it through. So that is certainly a dimension of this solar return. Now, a converse solar return is when you go the other way. So this solar return represents the time approximately 79 years after he was born. So every birthday you set up a new chart, and that might say something about the year ahead. But this is astrology. Astrology is all about time and messing with time, and time goes in all sorts of directions. Time goes forward and time goes backwards, and so with his solar return, we shouldn't necessarily just think about 79 years after he was born. We need to think about 79 years before he was born. So if you look at the positions of the planets, exactly 79 years before he was born, then you might get an idea about what could be happening 79 years after he was born. Now, that might not sound especially logical, but when you think about time and the fact that time just goes in all sorts of directions, and it only seems to be just going forward, but in fact, it can go backwards, it can go sideways, it can go into sort of multidimensional space. You can get time warps, maybe you can get time travel, I don't know. But I do think that it's worth looking at his solar return for 79 years before he was born. So he was born in 1946. So the question is, if you subtract 79 from 1946, what do you get? Well, the answer is you get 1867. So this is his solar return set for June the 14th, 1867. Now, 1867 was 79 years before he was born. I mean, that makes sense, doesn't it? 46 years in the 20th century, and we've got 33 years in the 19th century. So, about 79 years before he was born. So this means that we can look at the positions of the planets in 1867 and get some idea about what 2025 might be all about. And so, turning to this chart, I think that it does look quite difficult to me. And, we've got, for a start, we've got Neptune on the midheaven. I mean, Neptune on the midheaven, does raise the question, does Donald Trump really know where he's going? Has he really thought it through? And, one does wonder, especially with foreign policy. He wants things to all be sorted out, quickly, and we certainly saw that in Ukraine. But does he really have the facts at his disposal? And there is always that question. And This solar return has a Mars Saturn square, and it's got a Mars Venus square. So you can see that there is Mars Venus square, and you have got Saturn also there. So it's got a wide Venus Saturn opposition, with sort of Mars kind of making a T square. And you look at the moon. The moon is at 23 degrees Scorpio. So the moon is, well, you could say because it's a converse solar return, you should be looking at backwards aspects. But the moon is close to Saturn, the moon is square to Mars, so you could say going backwards, the moon has made the aspect to Saturn. The moon has made the aspect to Mars and is now moving backwards to the conjunction of Saturn. Now that sounds completely weird because the moon of course doesn't go retrograde, but you just shouldn't forget that this is a converse return. But the point is, you've got Mars Saturn square, you've got moon square Mars, you've got moon conjunct Saturn, and as far as I'm concerned, that does suggest that his year ahead might be difficult, and there could be potentially bad things going on, and it could be very frustrating for him. So yeah, I don't think it's going to be easy, and I think that converse solar return really does indicate that. And turning to his solar arc directions, I think that solar arc directions are an important technique in astrology. And so he's just turned 79. He's turning 79. 79 is 79 degrees. 1 degree equals 1 year. So if we move every planet in his chart 79 degrees, then we get this chart. So he's got his sun in Gemini, but if you move the sun 79 degrees, that sun ends up in Virgo. And what we're looking for is aspects. So what kind of aspects does his solar arc directed chart make to his natal chart? And so here we have the bi-wheel. On the outer wheel, we've got Trump's solar arc directions. Inner wheel, we have his natal chart. Now, one aspect to me really does stand out, and that is the midheaven conjunct Pluto. So I'm going to be talking about that in more detail in a moment, but the midheaven is conjunct Pluto. Midheaven is the way Trump is trying to project himself, and with midheaven conjunct Pluto, well, you could just say, well, here is a man trying to be powerful, but it may say that he is under pressure. I mean, that is absolutely possible. He is feeling the pressure. And additionally, we have got solar arc directed Neptune on his moon, and so that does raise the question of how well does he really understand what is going on. And that Neptune, I mean, look at the solar arc directed Neptune. It's made the opposition to the moon, and now it's starting to make that opposition to the sun. So over the next year or two, he's going to have Neptune opposition his sun, and that could be about being weakened, or it could be about being deluded. And one sometimes asks, where is he getting his information from? Who is around him? And some of the statements he's made, for example, about Russia and Ukraine, does suggest that he's not necessarily being very well briefed about what the real facts on the ground really are in Russia, and the Ukraine. But maybe it's just all smoke and mirrors. He really does know. I mean, who knows? I mean, I don't know about the reality of the kind of political circles that Trump is moving into. But certainly Neptune, solar arc directed Neptune hitting his natal full moon, certainly looks to me to be quite difficult. And additionally, his solar arc directed Pluto right now is exactly square his Venus. Now, that may say something about his relationships, for example, his relationship with Melania, but it may say something about his relationships with other people, perhaps with other politicians, other political leaders in other countries, for example, Vladimir Putin or the Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia. So these are people he has to deal with. But with Pluto square his Venus, things could get obsessive, and there's a possibility that that he certainly could make some mistakes. Now, that midheaven hitting his Pluto, when I see that, I'm thinking, well, what does his Pluto actually mean? For example, what midpoints does Trump's Pluto actually hit? And so if we look at Trump's natal chart and we do his 90-degree dial, just because we want to look at his Pluto, we want to see what's going on with his Pluto. So there is his Pluto on a 90-degree dial. So that is the structure of his Pluto. And what we notice is that he has got Pluto on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. He's got Pluto on the Mars-Saturn midpoint all the time. So with solar arc directed midheaven hitting his Pluto, that aspect of his personality, Pluto on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, could be very strong. And I think that Pluto on the Mars-Saturn midpoint can be quite destructive, and it can be quite obsessed. I mean, what does Reinhold Ebertin, in Combination of Stellar Influences, what does he say about Pluto on the Mars-Saturn midpoint? Let's see if there's any insights here. So Ebertin says about that, Pluto on the Mars-Saturn would be brutality, the rage or fury of destruction, the intervening of higher power, bodily injury or harm, murder, the death of a great many people. The rage there is quite interesting, talking about the kind of rage that he might feel if things aren't working his way. And he's already hitting a brick wall with the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and it could be that he doesn't quite know what he's walking into with this new conflict between Israel and Iran. Now, if you look at Alfred Witter's rules of planetary pictures, we might get a different view of Pluto on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And Pluto on the Mars-Saturn, he says, interrupted development, to quit one of several activities, inception of a later separation or interruption of an activity, cause for a later sickness. Well, it does sound that he is under a lot of pressure here. So I think when we look at his solar returns, particularly the converse solar return and some of his transits, that Mars transit is serious. It's still there. It's still with him. He's got Mars moving on to his ascendant, and I think anger is a real possibility. And then the directions. We have to think, what does that Pluto on the Mars-Saturn midpoint mean? And it's something that's just with him all the time, and it could be about a potential for destructiveness, which may be manifested with that solar arc midheaven. So, what am I saying about Trump? I regard myself as being fairly objective about him. As I've said, I don't suffer from Trump derangement syndrome, but I still think that things at the moment seem to be going a bit wrong for his presidency, especially with foreign policy, and one wonders if he's fully in control. But how serious is it really? So, turning to his Vedic chart, in fact, just finishing with his Vedic chart. So, let's get the Vedic chart. Got it somewhere. Okay, here is Trump's Vedic chart. So, the Vedic chart shows that if we look at the various dashas he's in, in September of 2024, just over a month before the election, he moved into his Jupiter major dasha and Venus sub dasha, and you could say that it worked pretty well. I mean, he won the election, and this Jupiter major period, Venus subdasha, it does continue for a couple of years. It continues until May the 29th, 2027. So it's still got another couple of years to run. So that Venus Saturn, not Venus Saturn, Venus major period and Jupiter sub period is probably working quite well for him, and may save him from complete disaster. I mean, I think that there are a lot of dangers for Trump at the moment. I don't think the year ahead is going to be especially easy. I think that there are clearly forces that are trying to bring him down, and he could also be undermined by his own impulsiveness, and certainly short term that really does seem to be the case, because Mars is crossing his ascendant, and he wants things to happen. He wants quick resolutions. He wants peace in Ukraine. He wants the Iran matter to be sorted out. He just wants it all done, and it just could be impatient. And and with Trump, things can just happen. And don't forget that Trump has Kala Sarpa Yoga. And so with Kala Sarpa Yoga, there is a feeling of destiny. And, people are, obsessed about Trump. They like to blame him. They personalize things. But, Trump is there for a reason. I mean, it's not just some piece of good luck or bad luck, depending on your perspective, that Trump is president, like winning a lottery ticket. He is definitely there for a reason. He's there to take America in a particular direction. And so, one shouldn't argue about it too much, and one certainly shouldn't fall victim to Trump derangement syndrome. But, just because he's destined to be in charge of America right now doesn't mean he's necessarily going to do a good job. I mean, he may be actually destined to move things along by making serious mistakes. That is certainly possible. But I'm just thinking with a Vedic chart, it's Jupiter major period, Venus subdasha, Venus sub period. It does last for a long time, and it's been working so far for him. So it's quite possible that, despite everything I've just said, these solar returns and some rather difficult solar arc directions, he'll somehow manage to cut a way through, and that might be the pattern over the next couple of years. And, going back to what I was saying, I think in my last video, we've got this Jupiter-Saturn square right now. It's a first quarter type of Jupiter-Saturn square. We've just had the conjunction, 5 years ago, and now this is the first sort of aspect. And in fact, Donald Trump was born with this. So if we go back to his natal chart, let me just go back to his chart, Donald Trump's. So yeah, if we look at his chart, he was born with Jupiter at 17 Libra, Saturn at 23 Cancer. So he was born with a Jupiter-Saturn square, because this was what was going on in the mid 1940s, and so you could say that he resonates to what is going on, to what's going on in society. And so, regardless of all the international issues that are going on, and the fact that he might well be attracting it. I mean, let's not forget his inauguration chart. This was the moment he became inaugurated as president, when Mars was exactly on the IC. And that Mars on the IC is, I would have said, is quite a difficult signature. And if we look at that moon, if we look at that Mars on the IC, it's kind of interesting that the moon is around 6 degrees from the square of Mars. So you see the moon is at 18 degrees Libra. It's starting to make a square at 24. So 6 degrees apart, and I think it's often a good idea to use symbolic measures. And so the symbolic measure I'm thinking about is, probably 1 degree equals 1 month. Where are we now? If Trump was inaugurated on January the 20th, then 6 months later, where does that take us to? That takes us to the end of July. We don't need to be too approximate, but over the next month or two, the full potential of that moon square Mars might really start to manifest. And we've already seen this in the converse solar return, which has a Mars-Saturn square. So, in spite of the fact in Vedic astrology things look good, and I don't think that there's any reason why he shouldn't complete his presidency. I'm not looking at the question about whether or not he's going to drop dead. That's not an issue. But I think that if his health and fate allows him to complete his presidency, probably in the end he'll sort of muddle through. And as you know, I think that I don't think things really go seriously wrong until the Jupiter-Saturn opposition, which will be in sort of 2029, 2030. So, those are a few thoughts about Trump and his birthday. His converse solar return is certainly challenging with that contact between Mars and Saturn, and he has to control his anger, and with solar arc directed Pluto on hitting his Mars-Saturn midpoint, I think that is a problem that Trump has to deal with. So those are a few thoughts about Trump. These are themes that I will be returning to, and now I want to finish by looking at the I Ching. So this is the I Ching reading for the week ahead, for the week starting on Monday, June the 16th. Don't forget, if you don't want to watch this I Ching reading, then it doesn't apply to you. It only applies to people, who are actually watching the I Ching section of this video. So if you don't want your I Ching read, well, you can stop watching the video right now. You don't have to worry about it anymore. So I asked the question, what is the week starting on Monday, June the 16th going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And this reading will have 4 subsections: general, money, career, and then relationships. So starting with the general picture, let's look at that first hexagram. And the first hexagram we got was hexagram number 59. Dispersion. And dispersion is about a storm. It's about things getting turned upside down, and it seems to be at first sight just a complete disaster. There's so much chaos, and it could be like the power washer aspect, or being stuck in a washing machine. Everything just gets spun around, turned upside down, and we really don't know what's going on, and it's impossible to make plans because we keep getting moved around. The storm is lifting us up, moving from one place to another place, and it's impossible to get anything done. And the situation seems to be disastrous. Now, what the I Ching tells us about dispersion is, in fact, dispersion is something fortunate. It is clearing the decks. And yes, it might seem dramatic, and we might have moments where we feel we're going to lose everything, but we're not going to lose everything. And it's quite possible that when the storm has calmed down, then we will find ourselves somewhere else. We're at the bottom of a valley, there's a sudden storm, and we're lifted up, and we're thrown miles away, and we land on higher ground, and we find we've actually made good progress. So the stormy chaos could very much work in our favor. And this hexagram dispersion, there are no moving lines. It doesn't move anywhere. And so some of us might feel that we're in some kind of slow, ongoing storm. We can almost see things in slow motion moving round and round, and us being churned and moved from place to place. And it can be difficult to get our bearings. But once this process has stopped, we will actually realize that everything has changed. And yes, we have made some real progress. Now, the nuclear hexagram of dispersion, which, nuclear hexagram just gives us some idea about, some of the underlying themes of this aspect, is the nuclear hexagram is hexagram number 27, and that is the corners of the mouth. And this may indicate that some of our confusion may be about other people. The corners of the mouth can often be about how we judge other people. And one way of judging people is to actually look at what they're eating, because the corners of the mouth is about eating. And what is someone nurtured by? Some people are nurtured by status or money or admiration. Maybe they got big egos. Other people, they may be motivated by just helping other people. They love helping other people. So if you are confused about people in general, as you might be, because this hexagram is about dispersion, it's about turning things upside down, then ask yourself, what do people want? What do they really want? What are they after? And what do they eat? What do they feed on? And once you're able to answer that question, then you should find that things are actually a lot simpler. And then we turn to the matter of a question of money. And so we've got this hexagram dispersion with no moving lines. And so in terms of one's attitude to money, or your attitude to money, you are not entirely confident, because you find it's difficult to reach conclusions, because perhaps things are changing all the time. And events over which you have little control seem to be having a real impact on your finances, for better or for worse. And probably your immediate reaction is to think, well, it's for the worse, it doesn't look good. There's just so much chaos, and you're trying to get the books to balance, and it's really impossible. And so what do you do? Well, the advice is to go with it. You don't have to, spend money. You don't have to lose money. There is a perception that you might lose money, but I think that it might be a false perception. And when the storm subsides, you'll realize that you have moved on, and that you have actually a better understanding of your financial situation. And so there could be improvement when actually you think that improvement is impossible. And the nuclear hexagram for this is the corners of the mouth. And so this indicates to me that a lot of this is about who to trust. That is the fundamental question of this hexagram, the corners of the mouth: who to trust. And how do you work out whether or not someone can be trusted? Well, you ask yourself, what do they want? What motivates them? And if you can answer that question, it won't be long before you really understand, whether or not a person can be trusted. And with the corners of the mouth, what do they feed on? That is what matters. And once you're able to answer that question, then you'll be able to have a more realistic and down to earth view of your finances. And then there is career and business, and things are changing. Things are moving quickly, perhaps too quickly, and you would like things to be properly organized and to just know how things are moving, know where you are at a particular time, and you might go into work, you relate to your co-workers, and everything is straightforward, and you don't look for change. But 59 dispersion does indicate some kind of change, and it's a kind of an ongoing change. It's just happening, and you can just actually see it. You can see the wheels moving, and you can see how things are getting disrupted. And your first instinct might be to feel that some of your careful work and your preparations are all under threat. It could be so easily swept aside, but I don't think that's likely to happen. I think that if you're true to yourself and if you're true to other people, you will be allowed to continue with whatever you're doing, and you will be able to expand on it. Though, in terms of trying to understand, who can trust, who can you have good, for example, business partnerships with, who can you rely on. The nuclear hexagram is 27, which is the corners of the mouth, and with the corners of the mouth, you always have to think, what motivates other people. Someone might appear to help you. They might appear to suggest that you might have some cooperation with them. That's great, but why? What is the purpose? Who are you helping? Are you being helped? Maybe you're actually helping someone else. And if you can answer that question, then it's going to be much easier for you for you to make decisions about which people can be trusted and which people should perhaps be avoided. And finally, there is relationships, and the first hexagram is dispersion, and relationships really could be in a state of flux over the course of the week. Things moving quickly, and it being actually quite difficult to really understand what another person is like. And if you're involved in a new relationship, whatever that relationship is about, then you might be distressed by the way the other person moves, or they try to take things too quickly, and also they may not stay in one place, and you might start to view that it being a situation where you're just losing your bearings. You don't know what someone represents, and their actions, they could be confusing, and they could just sort of rather be like a storm. And so there could be a storm with relationships, and it doesn't mean that there has to be another person. That you just become part of something larger than yourself, and you get moved from one place to another, and then the storm goes, and suddenly there's clarity, and you actually understand what a relationship is all about, and you know what to do. And looking at the nuclear hexagram, the hexagram underneath the hexagram, if you knock off the top four line, the top line and the bottom line of dispersion, and you take you take what's left, the four lines left, then you take your top three lines become the top trigram, the bottom three lines become the bottom trigram, and we get hexagram number 27, which is the corners of the mouth. And this really does say something about relationships and how you can judge another person. And just remember that everyone's got a set of motives, and there are things that everyone regards as being important. So if you're in a relationship with someone with the corners of the mouth, ask yourself, why is this person in a relationship with you? Why? What is the point? What are they looking for? What do they want? And you may not have asked yourself this question, but when you do ask that question, you're in a position where you can start getting answers, and you might then have a chance to really understand the truth of the matter. Perhaps someone wants to be in a relationship with you because it serves their selfish interests. They could want to be in a relationship with you because you're on their wavelength. That sounds a good reason. So, do think about that motive. It might be that someone wants to get something from you. Maybe they're greedy. So there can be a lot of very bad reasons why someone wants to be in a relationship with you. And I think over the course of a week, perhaps this is something that you can understand. So that's all I want to say about the I Ching. So thank you very much for listening to this video. I hope you have a great week. And if you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description. And I will talk to you again very soon.